What if I were to inform you that one of history's most notorious emperors did not merely burn cities or murder his mother, but also attempted to resurrect his deceased wife by compelling a young boy to assume her identity? This is not a myth. It is not a perverse tale from a forgotten civilization. This event transpired in the Roman Empire. His name was Sporus. He was young, beautiful, and defenseless. Nero, the Roman emperor, infamous for his madness and murderous tendencies, gazed upon this boy and perceived something alarming: a substitute. He castrated the boy, bestowed upon him the name of his deceased wife, adorned him in royal garments and jewelry, conducted a public wedding, and presented him to the empire as his new empress. By the time Nero first beheld the boy, he had already committed unspeakable atrocities. He had witnessed Rome engulfed in flames, silenced his adversaries with poison and the sword, and proclaimed himself not merely the ruler of the empire, but also an artist, a deity, a performer upon the grandest stage. Power had utterly distorted his perception. Poppaea Sabina, his second wife, was both beautiful and graceful, and Nero had her killed while she was pregnant. Poppaea was no ordinary empress. She was the only individual whom Nero appeared to genuinely desire and perhaps even fear. Subsequently, he yearned for her return, not in memory nor in dreams, but in corporeal form. This is when Sporus came into play. The boy bore an uncanny resemblance to Poppaea, at least in Nero's eyes, and that likeness was sufficient. It was irrelevant that Sporus was a child. It was inconsequential that he was a boy. Nero did not perceive him as a human being. He viewed him as a substitute, a vessel to be shaped, a visage to be adorned. Thus, with no more emotion than if he were sculpting a statue, Nero commanded the boy to be castrated. This was not a clandestine event concealed within the palace walls. No, Nero transformed his insanity into a spectacle. He adorned Sporus in imperial garments, embellished him with Papa's jewelry, and even arranged an extravagant public wedding. Indeed, a wedding. Nero took Sporus as his bride, complete with all the grandeur and ceremony of a royal union. The empire observed, some murmured, while most remained silent. Who could dare to confront a man who had already waged war on reality? Sporus was no longer himself, if he ever possessed a true self to begin with. He became the emperor's new wife, a doll crafted to smile, to stand beside him at banquets, to embody the role of Papa reborn. However, this was not love. This was not sorrow. It was a performance, scripted and directed by a man unable to cope with his actions, thus attempting to rewrite the world around him. And Sporus? He was the tragic actor who never auditioned for the part. Imagine being a child, perhaps 13 or 14, dragged into the emperor's chambers, not for punishment nor for a crime, but because of your appearance, because you reminded him of someone deceased, someone he had killed. This marked the onset of Sporus's transformation, and it was nothing short of horrifying. The initial step was physical castration, a brutal and irreversible act intended not only to strip Sporus of his manhood, but to permanently freeze him in a youthful, feminine state. In ancient Rome, this was not performed gently. There was no anesthesia, no compassion. It was a calculated mutilation, executed to make him more akin to her papa. Then came the garments. Silk robes, jewels, perfume, and wigs were styled to complement the empresses. Nero did not merely dress him, he transformed Sporus into a replica of Papa, intricately weaving every thread and adorning every ornament. Sporus was compelled to speak in a soft, trained voice, to walk with deliberate grace, and to conduct himself as a Roman noblewoman would, not as a boy in disguise, but as a complete public substitute. Nero did not conceal this. Rather, he showcased it. They participated in festivals together, attended banquets, and made public appearances. Nero introduced Sporus as his wife, even having him carried in a litter akin to that of an empress. The Roman elite, constrained by fear and sycophancy, complied. Senators bowed, courtiers applauded, and no one dared to utter a word about it. The madness, when expressed publicly, may have appeared theatrical to outsiders, merely another one of Nero's eccentric behaviors. However, for Sporus, it constituted a daily psychological torment. He was not acting. He was not performing. He was ensnared, a living specter in another's identity, a boy compelled into womanhood, not by choice, nor by identity, but by decree. Each morning he awoke uncertain of where the performance concluded and where he commenced. For in Nero's realm, there was no distinction. Sporus had transformed into a symbol, not of affection, nor of remembrance, but of power, raw, delusional, imperial power. This was the type of power that could slay a wife and then reconstruct her from the remains of a child. Throughout all of this, Sporus remained voiceless. There are no surviving words from him, no letters, no diaries. His silence resonates more profoundly than anything he might have articulated, for how does one speak when even their name, their voice, their very essence is stripped away? The moment Nero died in 68 AD, everything was taken from you. Alone and terrified, he was declared an enemy of the state. Rome breathed a sigh of relief. The tyrant was gone. However, the empire plunged into chaos as civil war broke out. Generals turned against one another, and emperors rose and fell like dice cast upon blood-stained marble. Amidst this turmoil stood Sporus. You may assume that his nightmare concluded with Nero's death, but for Sporus, being Nero's widow did not grant him an escape. Rather, it became a haunting identity that pursued him relentlessly. After Nero's suicide, Sporus did not fade into obscurity. Instead, he became a macabre trophy, a living relic of the fallen emperor's madness. He was soon taken in by Nymphidius Sabinus, a commander of the Praetorian Guard, who briefly attempted to seize power for himself. What did Sabinus do with Sporus? He proposed marriage. Yes, a different man, a different wedding, yet the same nightmare. Sporus was no longer regarded as a person. He had become a symbol, a trophy of proximity to power. Sabinus sought legitimacy, and what better way to achieve that than by marrying the former bride of the emperor? However, Sabinus was killed before the wedding could ever occur. Then came Otho, one of the many short-lived emperors of that year. Of the 4 emperors, too had once been married to Papa before Nero took her. It is conceivable that kept Sporus out of a distorted sense of connection to the past, serving as a living reminder of what both men had lost. However, once again, Sporus was not cared for. He was treated like furniture, akin to a cursed heirloom that no one could discard. By this time, Sporus was likely in his late teens, yet he had never truly matured. Not freely, not fully. His youth was spent being passed between men who regarded him not as a survivor, but as a souvenir of madness. He did not belong anywhere. Not to Nero, not to not even to himself. He was a doll without a master until Rome discovered a new method to break him, and that final act was the cruelest of all. By the time Emperor Vitellius ascended to power, Sporus had endured 4 emperors, 2 attempted marriages, and years of living as someone he never wished to be. Yet Rome was not done humiliating him. Vitellius, brutal, vulgar, and eager to entertain, found Sporus amusing, not as a person, but as a joke, a walking scandal. He sought to stage a spectacle. The plan was grotesque. Vitellius ordered a public display in which Sporus would be dressed once more as a bride, Nero's bride, dragged into the arena before a jeering crowd. This twisted reenactment would mock Nero's madness and Sporus's suffering, culminating in his violation by a wild animal as part of the entertainment. This was not theater. It was ritualized cruelty sanctioned by the state. In that moment, confronted with the most humiliating performance of his life, Sporus undertook an action that would represent his sole instance of control in many years. He ended his own life. No stage, no ceremony, no applause, merely silence. The specifics of how he accomplished this remain unknown, as they were never documented. After all, why would the empire record the death of a boy it had never regarded as a human being? The breaking of a doll does not make the news. It simply vanishes from the shelf. Yet within that silence, Sporus communicated more profoundly than anyone had permitted him to before. For the first time, the performance concluded on his own terms, and with his demise, the curtain finally descended on one of the most harrowing and twisted narratives of ancient Rome.